All right, let's get into our next discussion now. One challenge that many administrations have found difficult to surmount is the power supply problem in Nigeria, despite the billions pumped into the sector.
Absolutely. In fact, it has survived many administrations in the country. But as Nigerians continue to bemoan the epileptic power supply, experts say the country would continue to experience this problem until issues of obsolete equipment, debt crisis, gas pipeline vandalism, policy flip-flops, which are often occasioned by changes in government and the funding challenge, are all resolved. Now, Nigeria's power distribution has hovered between 3,000 to 5,500 megawatts, even though the generation companies boast of an installed capacity of 12,500 megawatts, putting Nigerians at the mercy of their generating sets.
In fact, the generating sets in Nigeria, thanks to all of them.
In fact, I better pass my neighbor at one time.
Public affairs commentator Femi Lawson joins us now in the studio. Femi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank
It's
you
nice to see you. I wonder if you have epileptic power supply in your area.
I think I'm quite sure that the last few days in most part of Lagos have experienced zero supply. If going by reports in the media, even from the areas where some of us have traversed in the last few days, and it's quite unfortunate. It's something that we must expect always as a country until we get it right.
We must expect.
Let us even go back to how she started earlier. One administration after the other, one administration after the other. The only time Nigerians could remember having constant light for a period of time was either in the 80s or part of the 90s. From the 2000s, it has always been nosediving. What is really the problem that any government can't handle?
It's very simple. Population has been on the increase. Infrastructures are expanding. Industries are increasing. But power generation capacity has never been increasing. And today, the situation in the power sector, whether we like it or not, is just a reflection of the state of our nation itself. Well, a lot of time we try to single out this sector for certain, rehabilitation, like so many governments have done. But the truth is that we cannot continue to appoint ministers, change ministers, pump in, privatize with one hand, take it back on the other hand, without addressing the key issues of, how this thing should operate. Today we have a system where even a state like Lagos, as populous as it is, as industrialized as it is, still has to rely on some funny supplies from the national, electricity authorities. You can imagine that we are still in, operating that same system that gave power supply to about 80 million population now, expecting same to be constant for about 200 million population is going to be difficult. We are not addressing the core issues, just like we have not been addressing the core issues entirely as a nation. So the power sector itself is a reflection of the state of our nation, and we cannot separate it.
So in essence, can we say that the problem with the power sector is majorly a political problem?
The political will to resolve the problem has not been there. And like I said, the government, on one hand, will claim to be, taking its hands off, this business of power generation and distribution. On the other hand, the government is jumping into the middle of it. In the last couple of days, we've had altercations between the Minister of Power and the distribution companies. You can imagine the level of, words and exchange of, fireworks that we have been experiencing. And it is because the government is still deeply involved. The government and the central, is still practically in charge, despite handing over distribution and generation to private. And the truth is that the system of privatizing these companies, like we have been demanding since 2013, has not been transparent and is yet not transparent. And these are the issues that have continued to breed the character, the kind of scenarios that we have been experiencing in the last couple of years.
Now, when we have to, if we narrow it down to the issue of skill, for instance, Nigerian electronic engineers and mechanical engineers are abound. In fact, so many of them are consultants to so many agencies and organizations and companies across the world. Now, if we bring it back home to Nigeria, although you talked about the issue of political will from the government on one hand, which certainly that is where all the funds and policies come from. But from within the company itself, even let's not even talk about the funds and even the political will yet. From the company itself, do you think they've put their skill into practice the way it's supposed to be, or bring it to
the environment determines, how
you operate?
How you operate. It is not going to be impossible for people to volunteer. These are not charity organizations.
Okay.
These are money-generating organizations. No matter the amount of skilled personnel that we can boast of as a country, they are not going to volunteer their services, on charity basis, because these are people who have gone to school. These are people whose parents have toiled, to train. We cannot just reduce their competency just to the level of patriotism and our own desire to have constant. These are private companies. The private companies must be willing to pay the bills to get these hands. And I think the issue is not even about having competent hands. You can have all the competent hands in the distribution companies in Lagos, in the generating companies. But the truth is that as long as you say have a system where gas have to be piped, from a distance of hundreds of kilometers, to where this electricity is generated, without breaking down this long chain. Today, if there's a break, or a disruption in the gas supply, fueling these power stations, then the entire country is thrown into darkness. So these are the core issues that has to be addressed. It's not about the manpower. It's about the system itself. How do we rely, on a main, if you take the gas away and a few hydropower stations, nothing works again in the electricity sector. How do we ensure that we take, the over-centralization of the power sector away and give power to states? Like Lagos, it is ridiculous. No country will a state like Lagos not be able to generate and distribute,
and of course, Lagos government
power.
Has so many times talked about
tried
the
it, but
ability to...
the frustration has always come from the central. And we cannot continue to address the issue of having stable power supply in any country. And without getting this right, every day we talk about unemployment. We can't talk about security in any serious country. You can't talk about growth, infrastructural growth. We can't talk about tackling the issue, no matter the amount of billions that we pump into creating wealth, as the government at various levels have been doing, it will amount to no result, because power is very key. And as long as we are not ready to address the core issues that will decentralize the power sector beyond what it is now, it must be liberalized more, beyond what was called privatization in 2013, which till date remains one of the most untransparent processes that we have experienced in this country. Today, the average Nigerian cannot even pinpoint the ownership of some of these companies.
Okay.
So we must liberalize this sector more. We must look at decentralizing the power sector as it's presently constituted, so that power can be given to competent and capable sections of the country to produce and distribute.
Let me come in here.
Yeah.
By liberalizing, what do you mean? Do you mean that the arm of the power generation chain, which is still under the government, should be put in the private hands?
No, not actually. The government has a role to play, because when it comes to regulation, you can't totally take away the hands of government, but the federal government must reduce its power and give power to some of these constraint, authorities, states like Lagos, River, Delta. There are states in Nigeria that are viable enough, to operate and produce power and ensure that there is advancement in the sector. But as long as the central government is not ready to release, that authority, as long as we have to wait on a minister in Abuja, to determine the fate of distribution companies in Lagos, in Edo, in Port Harcourt, we'll continue to have the kind of situation we have on our hands.
Yeah, but as it is right now, with the decentralization or the partial privatization that took place, the companies that took over they've not shown or proven the fact that they are competent and capable to handle the assignment on their own.
It's okay. Now, for instance, we have the generating companies, but transmission today is still in the hands of
government.
The federal government.
Exactly.
Then coming to distribution. No, this is like a chain.
Yes.
And when one of this conjoining chain becomes ineffective, then you must expect that there would be efficiency in the sector. So these are the issues. I know that a lot of these companies, were just briefcase companies who came to make profit. And what we have heard over the year have always been increase in tariff, but there has not been increase.
In fact, at the point, the government had to even support them financially.
Yes, which is unnecessary. So we must look at really, defining the role of government in this business and ensuring that people, get, value for this, for the money they pay for these services.
It brings to mind again what you said earlier about, not doing due diligence when the government privatized the power generation company initially, knowing that these private people were not even financially capable of handling them.
That is the transparency aspect of it. Up to date, that is one of the sectors where corruption is most prevalent. As we speak, there's not been transparency, in the power sector as it is today. And until we address this issue of transparency in that sector, you see, we can see how they trade blames at every given opportunity at the detriment of Nigerians. So we must address this issue of transparency, and that is why you cannot just wake up one day and say 12 companies have been given the power to distribute electricity, and the ownership of these companies, their capacities are not known to Nigerians who are the receiving end. These are the issues that must be addressed before we can actually see if there will be a way forward in the sector. You cannot continue to operate companies inside briefcase and you expect such companies to deliver. It's not going to be impossible.
So the face-off between the minister and the discos, which we are seeing the outcome and the fallouts here and there, one of them boils down to the issue of when they mention revocation of license as part of the sanction and so on. Do you think that is the way to go if they are not performing? Or
that should not be impossible. But the truth is that, like the discos will always advance their own argument too, as the government be meeting
its own obligations.
Its own obligations to these companies. But these are the issues. You can't, and that is why the concentration of power in the hand of the ministry, will really continue to hamper any serious progress in that sector.
And then you wonder really which is the weakest link in this chain from the generation company. In fact, lately we've not heard any of the other arms blaming generation companies because they generate and we're not even distributing enough. So we'll talk about the transmission companies and the distribution companies. Okay, quickly, you can answer that.
Well, we still have over 12,000 generating capacity as we speak. And I think even with 10,000 steady distribution, I think we can still have some reasonable level of power supply across the country. But as it is, there's always a break when it gets to transmission. And that is why the discourse will always tell you that it is what we receive
that we can distribute.
And that is still in the hand of government.
So can you tell us some of the challenges these transmission companies are facing? Because we've heard about obsolete infrastructure and all that.
Of course, there have been several cases of vandalization, which has become so, oftentimes, there's always a break in that, sector. And, one of the reasons, like I said, is that between the generating point and the distribution point, we need to reduce the bureaucracy that has given that capacity, to give from the generating point to the distribution point from the government, because one of the key areas of ensuring that we have steady supply is the transmission, which is, in fact, one of the most critical aspects of this. And that is still subjected to the bureaucracy of government. The management, the transmission company, is still subjected to a lot of issues, of corruption, as well, if you listen to the arguments that have been emanating from these distribution companies in the last couple of days. So in addressing these issues, the privatization of the power company must be wholesome. Government should take its hands off this business and allow and reduce its role to supervisory role and the proper regulatory role.
Don't you think
that we may expect.
Private companies would abuse the system? We know some accusations that have been leveled against these schools.
No, I don't want to agree that it can be subjected to abuse, because we have seen in other sectors, for instance, the telecommunication sector, how private operators have been able to excel, and deliver as expected, at least to a large extent. I don't think we should have any fear, as a people, in ensuring that we give this job to people with the capacity. Government has engaged a lot of consultants. We have paid a lot of billions of dollars for a job that we don't know how to do. Then why not leave it to
Well,
those
it's a
who
different
can do it?
example, really. I don't think we should compare telecommunication companies
Even
to
the job, the
knowing
business
that
of transmission.
in this business of transmission,
How-
it's a chain.
Yeah.
They depend on one another for
Yeah.
their functions, to be effective. But in transmission companies,
Then
there
what
are
is the
different
capacity? Now
telecommunication
today,
companies.
what is the capacity of our government in managing the transmission process of power generation? It has proven not to be effective enough, and that's why you could have the limited number of, capacity that is being supplied to the distribution company.
Because one would also argue,
would
also argue that when it was NEPA, they were doing generation, they were doing transmission, they were doing distribution. So if they were that effective,
yes,
then it means
why selling it then?
Exactly. But let's
Are they effective now?
That's what we're saying. The point there is, if they were effective that time, one company was able to handle it that time. Then if you're privatizing and bringing more actors into it, then it should be even more effective.
Absolutely.
But it has gone worse.
Ultimately, some people have argued that there's some form of sabotage within the system where some people or company or individuals or the politicians, whatever they are benefiting from the status quo.
Yeah, but of course, whether you like it or not, the business of power in Nigeria today is still in the hand of the politicians, and that is where every time we talk about the transparency of the process, because how many of these people who got these companies, sold to them are actually competent? How many of them have, an history of, succeeding in that sector, haven't done business maybe, but today we have been reduced, to countries like Togo, Sudan, in terms of our capacity, and that should tell you the character and the capacity of people that these companies have been handed over to. And that is why the moment it becomes transparent, the Nigerians begin to demand. Even the sector itself would demand for competent hands, not people with unknown identities. So as it is still in the hand of politicians. A lot of manipulation still goes on, and that is why a lot of people still see certain forces within this country, especially forces behind importation of generator and distribution of fuel, diesel, and petrol, as having a hand in ensuring that, because for a country that spends over 3 trillion annually fueling generators, you could know that it's a lot of money, it's a large industry for those who are profiting from it, and they will never expect, I want public power supply to be effective in such a society.
Okay, let's look at another point. We had an official of distribution companies here, and we asked him a question about one of the accusations leveled against Discos, that even the power problem might not be this much, but the fact that Discos do strategic power supply. And we tabled that question to him. He said, we are businessmen. We have to make profit, meaning that they have power that they could supply to a community, but because they know that that community might not pay bills, they hold on to the power and supply another community. So in essence, that particular community is in darkness because maybe it's a poor community, or because Discos want to capitalize on their investment. So at the end of the day, it's all business for Discos.
Of course.
It's not about
these are not charity organizations. They are here to
make the service money. For the people.
So and I think that's very logical, because for areas where, for instance, there are prepaid meters that for every time you switch on, you are paying, you would not expect companies to leave suppliers of that kind of area and give to places where you have to, chase people around, where you have to mount the post to disconnect, and they reconnect at night. And so this.
And then you wonder why all Nigerians don't have prepaid meters yet.
Yeah, I think that's
the biggest question.
Yes.
You want value for money, put a meter there and give them light.
Yes, and that is one. These are issues that government has failed to address, because when you have, this prepaid meter, in most homes, even the power generating companies, even the distributors, will be ambitious, enough to ensure that as much as we supply, as much as the money we make. But today, only very few households, even in Lagos, have that. And
I think that policy has to be stronger. The policy has to be stronger. Where
operated in 1980.
Estimated billing is still right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Femi Lawson, for coming on the program this morning. Thank you so much. We look forward to someday there can be light in Nigeria. We have
even gone against God's instruction. God said, let there be light. But
in Nigeria, there is no light. Okay.